My foot in my boot, and this guy was waiting for me. Don't call the cops on me. I have a permit to do this. Look at this monster. Holy moly. I'm gonna split this up a couple more times. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Yosted. I'm Sean, and I'm about to start a sunflower patch. So you may remember last year we cleared out a big patch of brambles and brush by our compost piles because we wanted to turn it into a giant berry area, a place where we could grow strawberries and more raspberries and blueberries. And so I undertook the process of taking away all that bramble, all that brush, only to discover underneath, in the soil that was underneath it, a ton of industrial waste, junk, old building material. So rusted out paint cans, rusted out oil cans, sheet metal that had been rusted away, rotted vinyl, just building materials that had been kind of left to rot in the dirt for years, maybe even decades. So suffice it to say, I didn't want to just go in and plant edible plants in this toxic soil. I wanted to find a way to remediate it. So I did some research and I came across the idea of phytoremediators. In other words, cover crops that people will use to draw up toxins from the soil. And the one phytoremediator that came up again and again was sunflowers. There's a lot of research out there suggesting that sunflowers are hyper accumulators. So in other words, they accumulate so much junk, toxins, even radiation from the soil. Believe it or not, in Chernobyl, they use sunflowers decades later after that disaster. They're still using sunflowers to help draw radiation up out of the soil. That's how effective sunflowers are. There's other accumulators out there that are cover crops. I think mustard, alfalfa. There's a few others. The one that seemed most suitable to my needs was sunflowers. So I picked up a bag. Well, I didn't pick up a bag. I already had a bag of these black oil sunflower seeds that we give to our chickens. It's a bonus because our chickens love them and they help with egg production. So I had a bag of this sitting around. It's cheap. This bag I got from our local farm co-op for 15 bucks, this 25-pound bag. And I spread out a bunch of sunflower seeds, gave it a light till, gave it a light rake over, watered it. Lo and behold, a few months later, I had a very beautiful, robust patch of sunflowers that were acting as hyperaccumulators, drawing in all that junk out of the soil. It did so well that I'm going to do it again this year. Couple reasons why. I still don't fully trust that area. I still am a little sketchy with all the junk that was in the soil last year. I removed the junk, obviously, but it could still probably use another year, maybe two, before I start putting berries and edible things into that area. So I'm going to go through the exact same process that I went last year. And if you are similarly convinced that you might have some toxic soil, you might want to follow along with this process. Let's go do it. Now the method of sowing these sunflower seeds is quite simple. All you really need to do is take a handful of it and broadcast it. And I'm looking for heavy coverage because I want these sunflowers to grow as thickly and as broadly across this patch as possible. So when I cover an area, I try to get as much as I can. And if you have a little broadcaster, that might help as well. But you'll note that I'm just spreading them out. There's nothing much to it. It might help as you do this to kind of go down a row as well. Since this stuff is so abundant and cheap, and wild birds will actually probably come down and eat a bunch of it, I'm having a very heavy hand with how I cast this. You'll note all of the old sunflower stalks from last year are still here on the ground, just to give you an idea of how dense our sunflower thicket was. But you'll note how when you look in this whole area, it's mostly covered by sunflower seeds. That's what I want to see before I'll be satisfied and start to cover it up. So take a look. Everywhere you look, there's sunflower seeds. There's these black oil sunflower seeds. They've spread pretty much across this entire patch. I'm going to give it a little bit more of a thicker application, again, because this stuff's cheap. I got a ton of it, and I want to make sure as much grows as possible. Now, one question I remember somebody asking last year when I did this was whether or not there's any danger of these sunflower seeds crowding each other out and therefore not growing as well as they could because they're not receiving as much sunlight or they're taking up too many nutrients or whatever. That wasn't my experience last year. Last year we had a very healthy, robust yield of sunflowers. I'm showing video of how well it looked last year. And that was just with the blanket method where I just threw down as many of the seeds as I could. So I'm going to repeat what worked. That's my approach with pretty much everything in homesteading is if something worked before, it's probably going to work again. It worked last year, so I'm doing it again this year, blanketing as much as I can on this patch. Now that I've done that, I'm going to rake it in just a little bit with a garden rake. You'll note that as I'm raking it, I'm not giving it a heavy rake, or I'm actually not trying to move piles of dirt around. I'm just trying to fluff it up a little bit. Just basically mix the top layer of dirt with those seeds. That's it. At this point, I'm just going to give it a pretty deep initial watering, and try to keep it moist as much as I can. Provided it doesn't rain, I'll just have to come out here with the water wand, at least for the first month or so. Somewhere around the second month, these should be pretty well established and growing very well on their own without the need for watering. And by month 3, these should be beautiful and pretty high. So by the end of the summer, we should have a very beautiful patch of sunflowers. Obviously, I'll keep you updated on how it goes. In addition to amending or drawing up toxins out of questionable soil where industrial waste has been buried, sunflowers are also good at breaking up clay-heavy soil, which is a perennial problem for us here. There's so much hard Tennessee clay on our land that anything that breaks up clay or helps to break it down is a welcome addition to the homestead. Now, it should go without saying that once it's time to take the sunflowers out, once it's time to pull them up and dispose of them, I'm not going to burn them, I'm not going to compost them, I'm not going to feed them to my animals, I'm not going to get them anywhere near the garden. What I'm going to do is just take them to the dump. That's what I did last year. Now, there were obviously stalks, dead sunflower stalks left on the ground over there. I can't get all of them. But I'm going to keep them there while I grow out the next round of sunflowers. So it's important to remember these things are sucking up all sorts of toxins. So I do not want to transfer those toxins into my animals, into my garden, into the air around here. I'm just going to take them straight to the dump. If there's a better idea, if there's something else I should be doing with them, let me know. But they're not going to go in my compost. They're not going to go anywhere on the land. I'm just pushing them off homestead. Real quick, it seems like lately people are taking a very heightened interest in the legality of my doings here on the homestead. Last week's video, I had a big bonfire. I'm wanting to burn a lot because I want char and I want ash for a future pig pen. That's the subject of another video that I'll talk about at another time, but suffice it to say, I got a lot of wood to burn, and I've been burning it because I want as much of this good char ash as I can get. So somebody left a comment on that video, which has since been deleted, and it said something to the effect of, or it asked the question, aren't bonfires banned in Knox County? And I wanted to address that real quick, and I'm assuming they're referring to the wildfires that we had in East Tennessee, I think it was around 10 years ago. They may have been bringing it up because of that. There was horrific wildfires that swept through the area, loss of life, loss of property. It was a really bad situation that happened in the Smoky Mountains, not far from us. And so I'm guessing that's why they brought it up. So to answer the question, open burning is not banned in Knox County where we live, you technically need a permit. And I will say here on the record that I do have a permit for open burning. The second thing to bring up is that on the days that you burn, you need to call in. There's a hotline that gives you the thumbs up or the thumbs down on whether or not it's a good idea to burn that day because of wind conditions and things like that. And so on the day that I burned last week, this big giant bonfire, I did indeed call the hotline and check to make sure that it was an okay day to burn. I wanted to get that out of the way in case there was any other questions. Don't call the cops on me. I have a permit to do this, and I always check to make sure it's safe to burn. If it's a super windy day, I won't even call. I'll just assume that I probably shouldn't be burning. So to answer the question, I do have a permit, and I did call that day, and I will continue to burn. I've got so much wood to burn when it's safe to do so. Now, speaking of plants that suck a lot of minerals out of the ground, let's talk about comfrey, guys. Take a look at my comfrey patch right here. I got these comfreys as a gift from Permapastures Farm, from Billy Permapastures Farm. I think it was 2 years ago. Thank you to them. Shout out to them for gifting me these comfrey. Look how they're doing now. I believe these are Bocking 14, the Russian varietal. But I planted these, like I said, I think it was 2 years ago. I got cuttings. So Billy had sent cuttings of these comfrey plants. And I planted them like 2 years ago. And at first, I think for the first month or two, I planted them in early spring. For the first month or two, I didn't see anything. There weren't even shoots. And I was like, oh man, did I plant them in the wrong spot or did I do something wrong? Well, turns out I was just being a little too zealous. If I had just waited a little bit longer, I would have seen how well they did. So after about 2 or 3 months, they just exploded. And as you can see, my comfrey patch is extremely healthy. And for those, I'm sure most people watching know the benefits of comfrey. I typically use it for compost or for dressing out underneath my plants in the garden. You can use it for salves. Animals can eat it. I did feed these to our pigs when we had our pigs. There's so many things you can do with it. There's one problem with my comfrey patch though, and it's too small. I need more comfrey. It's very easy to propagate comfrey. From everything I've researched, from everything I've read, from all the videos I've watched, it's very easy to propagate comfrey, but it's something I've never done. So I'm gonna do it today and plant a bunch more comfrey out here in this spot where I put a bunch of old chicken straw, which I'll do a side note on that after this. The chicken straw mulch has been incredible. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But first, let's propagate some comfrey. I think I've got the hang of it. Ideally, within the next year or two, I'm gonna have this whole patch just filled up with comfrey. I'd like to get as much of it as I can just because of its uses, especially for me as compost. And when we do get pigs, this will be a great food source for the pigs. But the first thing I'm gonna do is take this giant overgrown comfrey and just take the top off and then use these. I'll probably use these in the compost. This is the first step. This is what they call a nitrogen fixer. And the beauty of this is that it's going to grow back with no problems. So I want to make sure I get down to the root of it. This comfrey is so big, I don't know where it stops and the next comfrey begins. Okay. I think this is it. There's a couple more in here. Let's make sure I cut all of these stems off. There it is. That's where it ends. It's beautiful. It smells great. And I'm going to hold on to these leaves. I'm either going to give them to the chickens or I'm going to put them in my compost just to add beautiful nitrogen to my compost. Step 2, now that I've cut all the stems off, or most of the stems off, it's time for me to dig out the root ball. And I want to be careful to save as much of it as I can, because I want to keep this as intact as possible when I bring it up. I did put some rocks around there that I need to be careful about. Just kind of slowly working this root ball out. There we go. Goodness gracious. Holy mackerel. Look at this. Wow. Oh yeah. Look at the size of this comfrey, my friends. I'm going to get so many root cuttings from this, as well as the crowns. I'm going to get several crowns that I can use here. Look at this. This is humongous. There's a root cutting. I need to be setting these root cuttings aside. So the very first thing you want to do is just expose the roots as much as possible. All right, this is big enough to where I'm just going to start splitting it. Does anyone have a sword? I need a sword to split this thing up. All right, look at this monster. Holy moly, I'm going to split this up a couple more times because I'm going to be able to get so many crowns from this, not to mention all the root cuttings. This is incredible. There's the other side. Look at that, guys. Wow. I can probably cut it up even further. Look at all this. All right, so I've split this giant comfrey root ball into 4 sections here. And at this point, what I'm going to do is separate the very top of these root balls, which is called the crown, and I'm going to replant those. Just basically put them in like I'm putting in a potted plant into the ground. Everything under that, this stuff, let's see if I can get a better one. I am going to separate these root cuttings out and cut them. They say 2 or 3 inches each root cutting will get you a viable comfrey plant. And so I'll have dozens and dozens of root cuttings just from this one plant alone. This is a thing of beauty. There's a root cutting for you. It probably could be a little bit shorter, but this will probably do as well. So my first step is to get these crowns off. How exciting is that, guys? Look at this. That's just insane. There's a crown. There's a crown. There's a crown. There's a crown. Okay. Those will each get their own holes. The rest of this, I'm just going to cut off these root cuttings. I'll get so much from it. I am thoroughly impressed. So that looks to be 2 or 3 inches, 2.5, 3 inches. That right there is a viable root cutting that will produce another one of these huge comfrey plants just from that little guy right there. Let's see how many I can get today. The very first planting I'm going to make is where I took the original comfrey bush from. I'm not even going to say comfrey plant. I'm going to say comfrey bush because this thing was huge. So I took one of the crowns, and you know what? I'm going to get some soil here. This is as wonderful as the comfrey is at breaking up this clay. It's still clay. I mean, you saw how well it grows in here, but I still want a somewhat porous medium to put it in. Man, there's so many worms. So I'm going to get some dirt, some soil from the garden to give that as a medium to put it into. There we go. There we go. I'm going to do that. Get that nice and tucked in. Pile all the rest of this stuff around it just to give it a good starting point. I'll probably dig maybe 3 or 4 other holes for the rest of those crowns because I want to get those back in the ground somewhere else on this patch. But let me show you real quick the method that people have taught me to plant the cuttings. We'll do that real quick. All right, so here's one of the cuttings. And the method that I've learned is one of the best ways to plant cuttings. It's really simple. You just pop your shovel in the ground like this. Get it semi-deep. I'd say that's maybe 4 or 5 inches deep. Then lift it up like this. So there's a gap, there's a slit. And then put your root cutting in, tuck it in like that. And then lift out the shovel. And then step on it. I believe that's how I planted the root cuttings for these guys. I was just sticking the shovel in, opening up that ground, popping the root cutting in. And they did well, so hopefully that works as well. So my goal at this point is to dig some actual holes for the crowns, I think 4 or 5, and then plug a bunch of root cuttings in this area. I'm probably going to have to put more straw down because I want to fill all of this with comfrey. Now the advice is to do this either in the fall or the spring, and it's kind of late in the spring, at least down here in zone 7A, where we're at in East Tennessee. We're flirting with the end of spring here. It's starting to get really warm. So I figured this weekend was probably the very last time I could feasibly put cuttings in the ground and expect there to be growth over the next few months. Otherwise, I just have to wait for a few months to see them grow. But I think I'm within the window where I'm going to see some growth. Any later, then I think it just gets too hot and there's just too much heat pressure on them. But I think we'll do okay. And we've still got quite a bit of rain left as well. So that should help. Foot in my boot. And this guy was waiting for me. This is a pretty big spider. I felt him move around at the bottom of my toes, or at the end of my toes, and I pulled my foot out. And he was still around. He's still alive. He just crawled out. All right, get on with you. Charlie, watch out. Now most of this comfrey I put in my compost. But I'm gonna throw a few to the chickens too. See what they think about it. I remember our pigs loved it, but I'm not sure how our chickens will respond to it. They might pick at it,